Hello, welcome to Chapter 2 of my Podfic of Story of Redemption to celebrate the upcoming 5-year anniversary of this fic. So that you all understand what to expect, I have decided to let you know the upload schedule. My plan is to upload 2 chapters every month until the actual anniversary. Then, assuming I can manage to get all of this done by then, the rest of them will be uploaded on that date. Until November, my plan is to upload one video on the 2nd and the 14th of every month. I also want to let you know that I will be reading the credits out loud for anyone other than myself who has provided artwork or music for this podfic, and I will put content warnings for individual chapters in these intros. Disclaimer: this is a fanfic of the Evillious Chronicles series. Evillious is the property of Mothy, and this is merely a non-monetized story written by a fan. With that out of the way, here's Chapter 2. As she was walking, Rillian tried to work out a plan. The most important part of this would be to not go to war because of Kyle, and not behead people for no reason. That would be easy enough, she hoped. So the question became, how could she convince people that she was better now? They had no reason to trust her, but she would need public support if she were to go up against the nobility. As of right now, Rillian was in an incredibly precarious position. She had the support of the nobility, but her people despised her. The nobility kept them in line, so Rillian was relatively safe. However, if she went against the nobility without the support of her people, she would get destroyed. But how could she gain their support without going against the nobility? Then there were the ministers. When she had been dethroned, the ministers had taken over the country by pretending they weren't affiliated with her and gaining public support. Perhaps it was her ego talking, but it seemed to her that things were not that much better under them than it had been when she had ruled. Looking back now, she could see the way they had been manipulating her. The richer she was, the richer they were, as that was how the kingdom operated. The ministry got a percentage of the taxes, which Rillian was mostly in control of. At least, she was the only one that could raise them. So naturally, they befriended her and encouraged her to get as much money as possible. They fed her ego and handled her tantrums, not like Alan, who did it because he loved her as his sister, but only because they knew that her greed and selfishness would help them in the end. She feared they would react badly if they knew about her change of heart. Lillian kept walking, deep in thought. She needed to find a way to trick the ministers and the nobility into believing nothing had changed, while still helping her people. More than that, while most of what they said was wrong, she didn't think all of it was. She needed a firm hand, as they had always said. She agreed that as a queen she couldn't afford to be a doormat, yet she needed to be far kinder than she had before. It was all about a balance. At this point, she was pretty sure life was easier as a nun. Alan was surprised to see the princess walking so purposely. One of the reasons he had tried to get her up so early is because she rarely walked with any purpose, and often delayed in the mornings, which often made herself late to her meetings. This was a meeting with Lionheart. He was the person speaking on behalf of the general populace, to her and her ministers, so he tried to get her up early enough that she would be on time for once. The half an hour's worth of crying should have put them incredibly behind schedule, but at this rate they would be early to the meeting. He glanced at the Queen's expression, so as to try and determine her mood. He was surprised that she seemed thoughtful. He was pretty sure she was spacing out, but had never walked this quickly when doing so before. "Your Highness?" Alan asked. She jolted slightly, seeming startled, another indication she'd been spacing out. Alan braced himself for her to yell at him for interrupting her thoughts, as she always had before, but she simply looked at him with a curious expression. "Yes, Alan? Is there something you needed?" she asked. She didn't even sound passive-aggressive, just genuinely curious and slightly concerned. Uh, I was just wondering if you're all right. You seem off today," he said, a bit nervous. Lillian was not as dangerous as most people thought. When you learned to read her moods, you knew what to expect. It was usually possible to predict how she would react to most things when you got to know her. You could learn when you needed to walk on eggshells or when she'd let things slide. When she was acting unpredictably was when she was at her most frightening, because now he didn't know what to expect. I, Rillian began, then she trailed off. How much should I tell him? She wondered. Everything, probably. Not all at once, though. The whole thing sounds crazy. Besides, he wouldn't trust it coming from me. Just because he loves me doesn't mean he would take me at my word. Your Highness? Ellen asked again. I am all right, she said at length. She trusted Alan far more than her ministers, or anyone really. She decided to tell a piece of the truth, one that wouldn't sound crazy, but something that would allow him to aid her in the way that she needed. I am simply wondering what the best way to go about this meeting would be, Rillian said, almost hesitantly. She wasn't sure how to say this. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Len asked. This is a meeting where you listen to the voices of the people, and make decisions based on what they— Len, I'm not completely stupid, she interrupted. She kept her tone serious, but did her best not to sound offended. Alan still hurried to apologize, so she cut him off again. I know that I haven't been the best ruler as of late, and I know what the complaints will likely be. I have no ill will towards those complaints, or the idea of making life easier on my people. I'm simply trying to figure out how I can do that without anyone thinking I've had a drastic change of personality. Y- you, you have, though? Your Majesty, please do not be offended by this, but you seem completely different than you did yesterday, Ellen said, earnestly. He honestly sounded genuinely concerned, which was touching, but not something she wanted him to continue feeling. He surely had better things to do than worry about Rillian's mental state. She needed a good cover story, but first, she needed to make sure they were alone. She didn't want a bunch of gossip to spread. She dragged Alan into an empty room and searched the whole thing, then glanced suspiciously outside the door, which made Alan look even more concerned. She was simply checking for any nearby people that might be spying on her for the ministers. Once she was sure they were in private, she turned to him. I know I'm acting differently, Rillian began. She hesitated, her mind racing for a cover story. He'd asked about a nightmare earlier, so— I had a dream last night, as you know, Rillian said. That dream has changed my perspective, and perhaps even my heart. Since he was still looking confused, she continued, I no longer see it as reasonable to execute those who commit the smallest of mistakes, or are simply unlucky. I no longer wish to tax my people into starvation for my own gain. I no longer see a need to scream in fury at those less fortunate than me for being unable to follow impossible orders. I feel nothing but disgust for the things I've done so callously up to this point, and I apologize, she said honestly. She watched as Alan's face turned into an expression of pure shock. You, you're serious, Your Highness? He asked with a tone of utter disbelief. Rillian nodded. I trust you, Len. I have no intention to deceive you. Frankly, I'm perfectly happy to give up some of my lavish lifestyle in order for my people to have easier lives and full stomachs, she said to him. And it was true. She'd lived as a peasant before. She knew that she didn't need the finest food or furnishings to be content. That that's wonderful. Your Majesty, if you're serious, I can think of many ways you can help your people, Alan began, but she cut him off again. The ministers would never allow it, she explained. The more money I possess, the more they do. They would never accept it if I were to cut back. They tolerate my spendings because they know my selfishness and greed will be better for them in the long term. That's why they can't know about this change I've had. I will have to act as I did yesterday, or else they may suspect me. I need to think of a way to help my people in a way they won't suspect, so I can stay on their good side until the common people trust me enough that the ministers can't simply do away with me. Alan honestly didn't know what to think. Leon had never spoken this way. Part of him thought that he shouldn't get his hopes up, since she'd had days where she was almost civil to her people, before executing them the next. But that expression on her face was one he'd never seen from her. She seemed emotionally and mentally exhausted, but determined all the same. I understand, Your Highness. What is your plan, then? Ellen asked gently. He softly smiled as she squared her shoulders in determination. I shall act as though I haven't changed. I'll throw tantrums left and right, yelling when I don't get my way, at least in front of the ministers. When not in front of them, I will act more subdued, but not so much that someone else may notice. They will simply decide I'm in a good mood. Still, I will be different, the Queen said, with a look of grim determination. Ellen honestly felt a bit of brotherly pride, even more so when she continued. My act will be far more bark than bite. No more execution for anything less than high treason or attempted murder. I will say it bores me, and think of different punishments. Having a reputation for being unpredictable will likely aid me in this. I will find a way to help my people. I understand, Your Highness, and I will help in any way I can, he said, bowing at her. This got him a soft but genuine smile. Thank you, Alan. Tell me, exactly how late for the meeting are we? She said, a bit of humor in her eyes. Alan winced. I'm sorry, he began, only to be cut off again. Don't fret about it. It's probably for the best anyway. At least as far as keeping up appearances, she said with a small wave of her hand. I suppose so, Ellen said uncomfortably. We will likely arrive 5 minutes late. She nodded. Let's give it another 5. I need to collect my thoughts. 10 minutes late to a meeting at 10:30 in the morning sounds about right. I believe it was 15 last time, in fact. But that could be explained by you wanting me up early for this particular one. Ellen nodded, and Rillian started pacing and muttering to herself. Ellen let her be. Frankly, he needed to collect his own thoughts.